I need to do this for my family. This is not a surprise to anybody. It's really sad that it's got to this point, but I've got to do something for my own mental health, for my wife's.
A single Instagram video has sent shockwaves through Buckingham Palace. Just hours after unseen footage of Lilibet surfaced online, royal phones lit up, advisors panicked, and an emergency response was triggered. Meghan, insiders say, was furious as scrutiny exploded, while palace officials moved with uncharacteristic speed. What should have been a sweet moment now feels charged, unsettling, and symbolic. But why did this video appear now? Who released it? And what hidden story might it expose as scrutiny spirals beyond control worldwide? A moment uploaded, a line crossed. At exactly 21:47 Pacific Standard Time on February 2nd, the video appeared. Without warning or preamble, Meghan Markle's Instagram feed refreshed, revealing a carefully arranged carousel of images and short clips that would soon ripple far beyond California. The footage, presented as intimate and unguarded, blended what looked like home-recorded moments from Montecito with flashes of recent travel, soft light, warm smiles, fleeting glimpses of family life. But it was the caption beneath the post that immediately drew attention. "Shot by our little angel." 4 words, casually written, yet loaded with implication. To many viewers scrolling late that evening, the video felt sentimental, even charming. A mother sharing fragments of her world, crediting her young daughter Lilibet for capturing the moment. But inside royal circles, the reaction was anything but tender. Within minutes, aides in London were flagging the post, replaying it, freezing frames, reading and rereading the caption. What appeared innocent on the surface triggered deep unease behind palace walls. The concern was not simply about the images themselves, it was about what the caption suggested. By publicly framing the footage as created by a 4-year-old child, Meghan had blurred a boundary the monarchy has spent decades carefully maintaining. Children in the royal family are shielded, their appearances measured, their visibility controlled not by sentiment but by protocol. Here, that line seemed to dissolve in a single sentence, inviting the world to see a private family dynamic while subtly pulling a minor into a global narrative. Palace insiders would later describe the moment as jarring. This was not just another lifestyle post, not another curated glimpse into Montecito life. It carried echoes of larger, unresolved tensions, ongoing legal sensitivities, unspoken agreements, and a growing concern over how children were being positioned in public storytelling. The contradiction was stark, a message framed as maternal warmth, intersecting with an institution built on restraint, duty, and long memory. What unsettled officials most was the timing. The video did not emerge in isolation. It landed amid heightened legal discussions, quiet consultations, and internal warnings already circulating about digital exposure and child safeguarding. The post felt, to some, less like coincidence and more like intervention, emotional, strategic, or both. The fact that it appeared without prior notice to royal legal channels only intensified that perception. As the hours passed, the silence from Buckingham Palace grew heavier, not calmer. Phones rang through the night, advisors weighed every word, every implication. Was this an attempt to humanize a fractured situation before decisions hardened elsewhere, a reclaiming of moral ground through imagery rather than statements? Or simply a mother unaware of how sharply a caption could cut when viewed through an institutional lens? By dawn in the UK, it was clear this was no minor digital moment. The video had exposed a fault line between private expression and public consequence, between motherhood as lived experience and motherhood as symbol. And as senior figures reviewed the post one final time, one question pressed harder than any other. How did a single caption, written in softness, compel the palace to prepare for its rarest move, breaking its silence at all? So, what do you think? How could one gentle caption shake centuries of tradition and force the palace into silence? Keep watching when silence became impossible. By the morning of February 4th, the quiet inside royal offices had curdled into something heavier. What began as a late-night Instagram post was no longer being treated as a fleeting online distraction. At precisely 700 GMT, Buckingham Palace released a statement. measured in tone, but unmistakably firm. Its language avoided names, avoided accusation, yet its meaning was clear. The palace was no longer watching from the sidelines. It was responding. The decision to speak publicly had not come easily. For days, senior figures had debated whether acknowledging the situation would only amplify it. But behind the scenes, the concerns had grown too serious to contain. On the morning of February 1st, Princess Anne had received a confidential ethics briefing prepared by Dame Ruth Vane, director of the Royal Institute for Child Protection. The document did not focus on headlines or popularity. It examined patterns, shifts in public messaging, inconsistencies in past statements, and the increasing presence of underage children in emotionally charged narratives. The conclusion was unsettling. Boundaries, it warned, were being tested in ways that carried long-term consequences. Princess Anne, known for her unflinching adherence to duty, was not inclined to let the matter remain theoretical. According to palace sources, she pressed for the issue to be treated not as a private family concern, but as a matter of institutional responsibility. The welfare of children, particularly those tied to the crown, could not be handled quietly if precedent itself was at risk. What troubled her most was not the visibility of the video, but what it signaled: a normalization of using intimacy as public leverage. At the same time, Prince William was taking his own steps. On February 1st, he convened a closed legal meeting at Sandringham with Sir Malcolm Westerly, the family's lead counsel. There were no aides, no media advisors, no soft language. William's focus was narrow and resolute. He issued an internal memorandum that cut to the heart of the matter. Narrative must be separated from guardianship. In his view, the line between personal expression and institutional obligation had been crossed, and failing to respond would amount to complicity. By the night of February 3rd, the situation had escalated beyond individual concern. A midnight strategy session was called in the Red Drawing Room at Sandringham. Present were Prince William, Princess Anne, Sir Malcolm, two unnamed child welfare advisors, and the Queen's Director of Communications. The mood, according to those briefed afterward, was sober and unsentimental. There was no discussion of public opinion, no speculation about backlash. The focus was fixed on safeguarding legal clarity, and the precedent being set for the future. What emerged from that room was a decisive shift in framing. This was no longer being treated as a media flare-up to be managed with silence or soft rebuttal. It was reclassified as an issue of child protection and constitutional responsibility. The monarchy, long cautious about intervening in matters involving family members abroad, now faced a choice it had postponed for years. When the statement was released at 700 GMT, its restraint masked its significance. It signaled that the palace would not allow underage family members to be placed at the center of public narratives, strategic or otherwise. It confirmed that legal protocols mattered more than sentiment, and that dialogue would continue only if grounded in truth. In doing so, the monarchy drew a line it had carefully avoided, one that suggested the rules had changed, and there would be no easy retreat once crossed. And as the palace drew its line, who truly controls a child's story, and can tradition ever bend? Stay tuned. The flight back that changed the atmosphere. As Buckingham Palace hardened its position, attention quietly shifted west toward the movements that had preceded the Instagram post itself. Meghan Markle's return to California was not incidental to the unfolding crisis. It was part of the timeline now being examined with fresh scrutiny. Just days earlier, she had been in Dubai, officially described as an investment and philanthropic visit tied to her newly formed venture, Elara Group. Publicly, the trip was framed around empowerment and global leadership. Privately, it included luxury branding consultations at the Burj Al Arab and a high-profile appearance at the Women of Power Summit at Dubai Marina on January 30th. From the outside, the trip looked polished and purposeful. Meghan appeared composed, confident, and fully in control of her narrative. But behind the scenes, royal legal teams were tracking something else entirely: timing. Her return flight landed at Los Angeles International Airport aboard a private charter arranged under the Elara Group banner. What raised concern was not the travel itself, but what did not happen alongside it. Meghan gave no official notice to Prince Harry's legal representatives, despite informal agreements tied to ongoing custodial sensitivities and communication protocols that had been quietly respected until then. Within royal circles, this omission was not viewed as a minor oversight. It was read as a breach of understanding at a delicate moment, particularly given the heightened focus on child-related matters. When the Instagram video appeared just hours later on February 2nd, that context snapped into focus. To palace observers, the sequence felt deliberate: international visibility, a controlled return, then an emotionally charged post centered on a child. The narrative did not unfold organically. It landed with precision. Public relations analysts quickly weighed in, many offering similar interpretations. Several suggested the video functioned as what one strategist later described as an emotional intercept, a move designed to preempt tightening legal or institutional actions by reframing the story through intimacy and maternal authority. The caption crediting Lilibet as the videographer was not seen as casual phrasing, but as a symbolic claim, subtly reinforcing agency, innocence, and authenticity in one stroke. This framing introduced a deeper concern: narrative interception. By placing a child at the heart of a warm, relatable story just as legal discussions intensified, the post appeared to shift moral ground before formal decisions could surface. It was not about commercial gain in the obvious sense, analysts argued, but about reclaiming emotional territory ahead of possible constraint. In that light, the video read less like a family keepsake and more like positioning. Inside the palace, unease deepened. Meghan's actions were no longer being viewed as isolated expressions of independence, but as part of a widening pattern, one in which personal storytelling consistently collided with institutional boundaries. The absence of coordination with Harry's legal team only reinforced that perception. To those advising the crown, it suggested not ignorance of consequence, but a willingness to act outside shared frameworks. As the hours passed, the idea that the video was spontaneous became harder to defend. Each element, the timing, the travel, the caption, the silence that followed, seemed to align too neatly. What had once been explained as instinctive maternal expression now sat under a harsher light, raising questions about intent rather than emotion. And as concern mounted on both sides of the Atlantic, one conclusion began to take shape among those closest to the process. This was no longer about a single post, but about a strategy unfolding in plain sight, whether acknowledged or not. But what if this seemingly spontaneous video was actually a calculated move, crafted away from cameras to shape the story? Stay glued. A strategy forged away from the cameras. While attention swirled around California and the palace's measured response, Prince Harry was already operating on a different plane, quiet, deliberate, and almost entirely unseen. Long before the Instagram video detonated into public view, he had positioned himself far from the noise, attending a closed-door session at the International Family Law Congress in Geneva, Switzerland. The annual gathering, known for drawing the world's leading minds on transnational custody and child protection, rarely attracts royal observers. Harry did not attend as a speaker, nor did he seek attention. He sat in silence, listening. This year's Congress carried unusual weight. Among the private panels was an in-depth discussion on digital exploitation in parental disputes, co-chaired by Sir Alaric Wexford and Dame Sonia Balaji, both widely respected figures in international child protection law. According to sources present, Harry asked pointed questions about digital consent, psychological proximity bias, and the growing legal challenge of content claimed to be child-initiated in high-conflict custody cases. There was no appeal for sympathy in his tone. He was not there to explain himself. He was there to understand the terrain. Less than 48 hours later, that focus sharpened into action. At 5:42 GMT, under heavy cloud cover, a chartered flight from Geneva touched down at RAF Northolt. Harry disembarked alone. Gone were the familiar trappings of royal travel. He wore a waxed canvas field jacket, a black baseball cap pulled low, no visible security detail in tow. The operation unfolded without press notice, without choreography. For For a man once synonymous with relentless media attention, the silence was striking. Instead of returning to Frogmore or Clarence House, Harry traveled directly to Fort Belvedere, his late great-grandfather's former Windsor estate, now serving as a discreet residence for crisis consultations. Those inside described the atmosphere as tense but focused. Harry spoke little. He ate alone. His attention remained fixed on documents, briefings, and transcripts. This was not a retreat, it was a recalibration. On February 1st, the same day as his arrival, Harry had quietly authorized his legal counsel, Hugo Bradshaw QC, to submit an internal proposal to the Royal Household Custodial Ethics Board. The filing introduced a phrase that would soon ripple through palace discussions: parental asymmetry in digital responsibility. The argument was precise. When one parent controls public platforms with millions of followers, the burden of restraint is not equal. It is heavier. The document called for immediate institutional recognition of that imbalance, particularly when minors are involved. The proposal was not emotional. It was methodical. It asked for clearer lines, enforceable standards, and an end to ambiguity around digital exposure. Those who reviewed it noted the absence of blame and the presence of resolve. Harry was no longer reacting to events as they unfolded. He was attempting to shape what came next. Privately, aides observed a shift in him. There was fatigue, yes, but also something harder. One staff member would later describe it as controlled fury turned inward. Harry reportedly reviewed clips from the controversial video frame by frame, not searching for intent or symbolism, but for risk. When asked by a confidant what troubled him most, his response was quiet and final. He said he no longer concerned himself with what appeared genuine. His focus had narrowed to a single question: what in all of this was actually safe? Now, how far can controlled fury push a man when safety becomes the only question? Stay with us. When duty replaced distance, Harry's quiet return to Britain did not remain a solitary exercise for long. Within hours, the circle around him began to close, not in comfort, but in coordination. Private meetings were arranged with care and discretion, away from press routes and ceremonial settings. At the center of them were three figures who had not stood on the same side of a family issue in years: Prince Harry, Princess Anne, and Prince William. There were no reconciliatory gestures, no emotional language. What brought them together was not sentiment, but a shared recognition that something structural had to change. The first of these meetings took place behind closed doors, with only a handful of aides aware it was happening at all. Princess Anne, long regarded as the monarchy's most disciplined enforcer of protocol, listened more than she spoke. Harry laid out his concerns calmly, drawing from the legal frameworks he had studied in Geneva. He spoke about imbalance, about exposure, about how digital platforms had become tools capable of shaping a child's identity long before that child could consent. Anne did not interrupt. When he finished, she asked one question: whether he was prepared to see this through without retreat. His answer, according to those briefed afterward, was immediate. Prince William entered the process shortly after. For much of the previous 2 years, the brothers had existed in parallel, their interactions cautious and limited. But this moment cut across old divisions. William had already been consulting with legal advisors at Sandringham, weighing the implications of inaction. When he reviewed Harry's custodial concerns, he recognized a wider issue, one that extended beyond one family dispute and into the future of the monarchy itself. In response, William drafted a letter of support that would mark a quiet but significant shift. The document, circulated internally, endorsed tighter limits on all media engagement involving underage royals unless formal consent was granted through established channels. It did not single out individuals. Instead, it framed the matter as one of public responsibility, arguing that visibility without boundaries eroded trust and invited harm. For the first time in 2 years, the brothers' positions aligned in writing. As momentum built, the palace moved quickly to formalize its response. Internal child protection task forces were activated, drawing together legal advisors, child welfare specialists, and communications experts. Their mandate was narrow and urgent: to assess digital content involving royal minors and determine where lines had been crossed. Alongside this, a monitoring council was quietly engaged to review recent public posts, assigning risk levels based on narrative framing and potential harm. Several entries, including the February 2 video, were flagged at the highest level, classified internally as red-level narrative conflation. These were not symbolic measures. Each designation triggered reviews, legal briefings, and contingency planning. The palace was no longer reacting to individual incidents. It was building a framework designed to prevent recurrence. Princess Anne, overseeing much of the coordination, was said to be unsparing in her language. Optics, she reminded advisors, were irrelevant. What mattered was precedent. Perhaps most striking was what did not happen. There were no public statements about unity, no staged appearances, no effort to soften the shift with familiar royal language. The consolidation unfolding behind the scenes was deliberate and restrained. It acknowledged that personal relationships might remain strained, but institutional responsibility could not wait for healing. For William, the decision carried particular weight. He had spent years insulating his own children from relentless exposure, releasing only a handful of carefully approved images each year. Allowing ambiguity elsewhere, he believed weakened that standard for everyone. For Harry, the alignment offered something he had not had in a long time, not validation, but backing. As these measures locked into place, the monarchy crossed a threshold it had long avoided. Emotional narratives, however compelling, would no longer override structural safeguards. The family, fractured in private, was now unified in policy, and in choosing rules over reassurance, the institution signaled that sentiment would no longer dictate where the line was drawn. So what happens when rules replace empathy? Can a monarchy truly control the narrative? Or will emotion still find its way? The cost of control beyond the crown. As the monarchy closed ranks and formal safeguards took shape, the consequences of the February 2 video began to surface far beyond palace walls. What had started as a personal post now carried measurable weight in boardrooms, media circles, and partnership meetings thousands of miles away. Inside Meghan Markle's professional world, the mood shifted quickly, from confidence to caution. On the morning of February 3rd, an emergency meeting was convened at the Elara Group, Meghan's newly launched luxury and leadership venture. Held behind glass doors in a sleek office suite in Santa Monica, the session was described by those familiar with it as tense and unusually frank. Board members, including former executives from global beauty and luxury brands, reviewed the sudden escalation surrounding Meghan's online activity. Their concern was not ideological. It was strategic. Several questioned whether the latest Instagram content aligned with the neutrality and restraint clauses agreed upon with international partners, particularly in the Middle East. The issue, as one advisor reportedly put it, was narrative volatility. Elara had positioned itself as a forward-facing brand built on empowerment, diplomacy, and credibility across cultures. The perception that emotionally charged domestic imagery, especially involving minors, was now intersecting with that identity raised red flags. Within hours of the meeting, a planned February 15th gala in Dubai was formally postponed by Elara's regional strategic advisor, citing alignment risks. Quietly, several Gulf-based influencers who had previously amplified Meghan's initiatives unfollowed her accounts overnight. The silence that followed was perhaps more telling than any statement. High-profile allies who had once been vocal in their support went conspicuously quiet. Serena Williams, approached by reporters during a press appearance in Miami, declined to comment. Oprah Winfrey, who had supported Meghan's pivot into thought leadership through media projects, made no mention of her in her latest public communications. Tyler Perry, often described as a close confidant, was reportedly overseas and unavailable. To industry observers, the absence felt coordinated, not hostile, but cautious. As support softened in private circles, the media landscape began to harden. In the UK and across the Commonwealth, coverage turned sharply analytical. Editorials reframed the issue away from celebrity conflict and toward questions of custodial ethics and child protection. Comparisons emerged, noting the contrast between how Prince William and Princess Catherine managed their children's visibility and the volume of images and clips shared from Montecito over the past year. Even outlets previously sympathetic began to adopt a more skeptical tone. In the United States, the shift came more gradually, but it came nonetheless. Cable news panels invited digital ethicists rather than lifestyle commentators. Discussions focused less on Meghan's intentions and more on the implications of public storytelling involving children. The framing changed from personal choice to public responsibility. By early February, major networks were no longer asking whether the palace had overreacted, but whether boundaries had been overdue. Inside Meghan's Montecito estate, the atmosphere was described by insiders as controlled but strained. Her communications team, once expansive, had reportedly narrowed to a small inner circle. Phones were switched to encrypted platforms. Press requests went unanswered. Despite the calm aesthetic still projected online, advisors acknowledged that the damage was not merely reputational, it was structural. Brand confidence had wavered, partnerships were paused, and the protective buffer of celebrity goodwill was thinning. What made the moment particularly stark was the contrast between visibility and influence. Meghan remained omnipresent online, her platforms intact, her audience vast, yet access to allies, to institutions, to uncritical support was shrinking. One Beverly Hills publicist summarized it bluntly. When a figure shifts from being perceived as misunderstood to potentially risky, people don't attack, they wait. As the palace moved forward with policy and Harry advanced his legal strategy, Meghan found herself increasingly alone in the space she knew best, the public arena. The tools that had once amplified her voice now echoed back with questions she could not easily control. And while the screen still glowed, the walls around her, professional, social, and strategic, were quietly closing in. Now, how did Meghan's fight for control in the public arena turn into a silent battle the palace couldn't ignore? The battle lines at Sandringham. By early February, the tension around the royal family had reached a fever pitch. The announcement of the February 10th Sandringham summit sent ripples through Buckingham Palace and the media alike. It was framed as a private, urgent meeting to address the mounting controversies surrounding Prince Harry and Meghan, but whispers of legal maneuvers and public relations strategies suggested something far more consequential was unfolding behind closed doors. Preparations were meticulous. Advisors drafted agendas, legal teams reviewed precedents, and aides rehearsed every potential scenario. Every move was calculated, every word weighed. Yet Meghan's response added an unexpected twist. She refused to attend the summit, signaling her determination to retain control over her narrative and protect the autonomy she believed was essential for her family. Instead, her legal team prepared a counter-affidavit, a formal document that would assert her stance on matters concerning their children, challenging the palace's framing of parental authority. It was a move that juxtaposed maternal instincts against centuries of institutional guardianship, highlighting a clash that resonated far beyond the palace walls. Public attention only intensified the stakes. Polling data began to reveal subtle but significant shifts in perception. A growing segment of the population voiced empathy for Meghan's insistence on agency and visibility, while others argued for the weight of tradition and the responsibilities of legacy. Media outlets framed the debate as a stark contrast between two competing ideals: the inherited prestige and authority of the monarchy versus the modern demand for transparency and personal agency. Every report, headline, and social media post seemed to tilt the narrative slightly, shaping opinions before the summit even convened. Within the palace, advisors grappled with a delicate balance: how to uphold the family's reputation while acknowledging the very public scrutiny that Meghan's stance had invited. Every legal clause, every historical precedent, and every media projection was dissected in anticipation of what many already predicted would be a confrontation unlike any in recent memory. For Meghan, the battle was clear: to assert that the story of her children, their upbringing, their privacy, and their public portrayal was not solely determined by tradition or inherited power, but by the parents themselves. As February 10th approached, the atmosphere around Sandringham was electric with expectation. Security and staff prepared for a summit that promised civility on the surface but carried the weight of unresolved tensions just beneath. Outside the estate, journalists speculated, the public debated, and commentators framed the struggle as a modern conflict: legacy versus visibility, duty versus choice, private rights versus public fascination. Amid it all, one question loomed, larger than any headline or statement. In a world where millions were watching, who truly gets to define a child's story? So, what do you think? Will tradition hold its grip, or will a mother's fight for autonomy rewrite the rules of the royal family? We'd like to hear your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.